Thank you for having me. It's a really exciting conference. I thought we'd start, if it's okay with you, by playing a game. Is it okay to play a game? Well, not that kind of game. A bid optimization game. It's better. Here's the thing. We talked a little bit, I've heard other speakers talk about programmatic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about programmatic and bid optimization. You don't have to know a lot about programmatic. To play the game, this is what you have to know. That when you Google, for instance, there's an auction that goes on in real time in the background, right? And we're trying to match supply and demand and decide how much to bid on that person in the context of what they're doing in that moment. So what I want to do is play a little game where I'm going to show you all the data that we have about one person at one point in time, and your job is to try to figure out the perfect bid to get your ad in front of that person. Okay? Let's see if I know how to make the clicker work. There we go. All right, if you need paper, if you need computers because it's data science, here it comes. All right, so what do you bid? I expected you guys to do better because we did this with advertisers a couple weeks ago and they were bad, but you're a data scientist. Does it make more sense backwards? Sometimes it's like a Beatles album, we think. Maybe if we play it backwards. I'm getting handed the clicker. All right. Let me try it like this. There it goes backwards. Without being pedantic about it, that's the game we're playing in programmatic marketing. There actually is data in there, and I'll show it to you in a bit. But the volume, the velocity, the variety of data to make an instant decision on how much to bid and the message to put in front of your customers is almost impossible with the current technology. Now, as a marketer, this holds the potential, this universe of data holds the potential for real one-to-one marketing. We should be able to understand who you are, and we should be able to put the perfect message in front of you because there's enough data in that cloud to be that precise. But we're not able to do it today. And in fact, I don't know any company that can do it. And I'd go so far as to say that most companies that I interact with are even struggling with getting over the hump, that the data, instead of becoming an asset, actually often becomes a barrier to having a conversation with your clients. Okay? So that's what it looks like from a marketing perspective. And we're not driving the ROI we want. If you think it's an issue from a marketing perspective, think about it from a consumer perspective. Okay? So marketers are struggling with the data. We're not getting the ROI we want. You're all consumers, and you've all had the experience that I've had that goes something like this. I don't know why we're having this experience, but we'll see how it goes. I bought a belt online. You would think from the marketing that pursued me for the next month that my life revolved around belts. Well, if the presentation doesn't work, we'll just talk about it. Green arrow. Okay, thank you. So this is what happened for the next month. You would think I had swapped my family for a belt emporium. You would think that I had opened up a leather goods store out of my home. But the reason this is happening is not because there's not enough data about me. It's possible to know your customers much more deeply, but this is what the systems are able to make of the data. This is the intelligence that's coming out of the systems because we're struggling with the volume, the velocity, and the variety of data. Okay? So take that as the problem. That's the problem statement. Marketers are not driving ROI. Consumers are not having good experiences. And it's not because that we're not able to have data. It's because we don't know how to interpret the data. So I lead marketing for IBM, analytics for marketing for IBM. And we have not solved this problem. I'll start with that. I don't know anyone who solved this problem. I think anyone who tells you they've solved this problem, I'd run away. what I'd say is we have some very personal experiences trying to apply our own technology to this problem, and we are seeing progress, and that's the story I want to share with you. So we start to ask, how do you make sense of the data? How do you get intelligence out of this system? And it's easier to understand if you go back into the data that I showed you. I'm going to go back into this universe of data, and we're going to strip out most of the complexity. I'm just going to show you the essential elements that are in this that you probably missed the first time through. So for example, you may not have noticed the first time through, but we know some demographic data about the person. So this is actually a 24-year-old woman that we're bidding on. That's valuable. That matters for our bid. That matters for our message. Right? And it's also a good reminder to people who are in the data science field that this is a human being. Our goal is not to get data about this person. It's to understand this person. And that's not the same thing. 24-year-old woman. That's the demographic. That's the person. There's also data, if you look, about the context that that person exists within in the moment. Remember, these are all real-time bids. So their location matters tremendously. Where are they? The device type they're on matters. The context of the search matters. So for example, take the 24-year-old woman. 24-year-old woman who's at the office on a laptop doing a search on IT security. We're going to bid differently on that person relative to the context. Same 24-year-old woman, she's at the mall, she's on her phone, she's doing a search for good places to eat. Different bid, different message, same person, so the context actually a lot of times overrides what we know about the demographics of the person. There's also a whole category of data that we pick up through these systems about what I call the environment. So even broader than the context of the person, this is where things like seasonality matter. In our models, seasons matter a lot, in part because IBM is a B2B company. So we think a lot about quarterly budgets. Weather matters tremendously. $500 billion of retail impacted by weather. So you want to know the weather. News matters. Again, back to that 24-year-old woman, if she's in the office and she's doing a search on her laptop for IT security, and a story broke that morning about a new breach at a credit card company, that actually changes our bid, and that changes the kind of message we want to put in front of her, but we have to know that in the moment, and we have to be able to act on that. So let me pause there in terms of the data. That's 4 or 5 variables. It's one person. It's one point in time. And if that's all we had to do, then anyone in this room is overqualified to build a set of rules to optimize. And so we might write a rule that said, for instance, at least for IBM, we're going to bid more when she's at the office and less when she's at the mall. We're going to bid more for whatever reason when it's sunny and shining outside versus when it's snowing. Rules. We'd give it to a computer, the algorithm would run, we'd do it at scale, and we'd do instant bids. That's the state of programmatic today, essentially. You have smart people who are writing a set of rules that are pretty fixed, and then they're executed by a machine that isn't thinking, it just executes. So a smart person, a set of inflexible rules, and a machine that's dumb. That doesn't work. And it doesn't work in part because it's not 4 variables. When you interact with a DMP, you're going to have hundreds of variables. So I'm just giving you a sample of the kinds of information that's available. It's not one person at one point in time. It's actually millions of people across a continuum of time. And there are trade-offs between time, right, and people. Because if I bid in the morning on the 24-year-old woman, I don't have dollars in the afternoon to bid on maybe something that came up better. So I have to be able to anticipate in the morning what's going to happen in the afternoon. And if that's not complicated enough, everything we're talking about, everything you'll find in the typical DMP or DSP, it's structured data. That's what we're good with. 80% of the world's data is not structured. It's images, it's videos, it's audio, it's text. None of that data sits in our traditional systems. We have to find a way to pull that into these models. And one more, just because we don't want it to be easy, it's dynamic. That rule that you wrote in the morning based on what you knew, it's not that relevant in the afternoon. And by a week or month, it's obsolete. So this system has to move at the speed of information. That's the problem of programmatic. So my premise and the thing we started with was change the paradigm so it's not a set of fixed rules being executed by a dumb machine, but make the machine smarter. Because if the machine is smart, then the rules can be dynamic, and the rules can change, and every time we go through the process, actually the machine gets smarter. That's what we've started to introduce, and I'll take you through the story. I do want to introduce the notion that we call this cognitive at IBM. Other people call it artificial intelligence. We prefer cognitive, just so you understand that this is not a generalized Star Trek-like computer system. This is about being very smart in a domain and having a computer set up with a set of algorithms and rules that learns within that domain. That is a tool that supports people, and it makes marketers better at marketing. This is not a tool that replaces marketers. And so one of the powers of not just building I'm going to skip the video, I think. Watson makes videos. One of the really powerful things about becoming a more cognitive business, not just having cognitive models, is that it lets marketers get back to marketing. Because marketing is not about data. Marketing is not about analytics. Marketing at its core has always been about understanding people. Do you actually understand your consumers, not as segments, but as individuals? That's always been the promise of marketing, and it's now more possible than ever, but you have to get back to the core. And so when we ask questions like, who is this person? The answer can't be just that it's a 24-year-old woman. Because I'm not just a 24-year-old man. Well, I'm not a 24-year-old man. I'm not a 40-year-old man. That's an aspect, a little piece of data about who I am, but that's not who I am. What do they need? Do they need a belt? Are they at the mall? That's not what they need. That's not the core of marketing. That's where they are. And none of the data we've talked about, none of the data that sits in these traditional systems talks about values. What's marketing at its core about? Marketing is about connecting to people on values. It's about emotional resonance. And we don't get there through traditional marketing. But if you interject intelligence into the system with tools like Personality Insight, Watson Personality Insight, if you want to play with it, it's available. You just Google Personality Insight and you'll find it. This is able to ingest unstructured information about an individual person or segments, and it's able to make sense of it by taking that information and putting it against a set of models. Value models, needs models, psychological models, like Big Five. So if you're close enough to it, you can read, this is Pope Francis. This is based on this one person named Francis and the way that he speaks and communicates, and what do we know about his values, his needs, and his personality. So for example, it's really kind of fun to notice, he scores very high on the love scale. Okay? He scores very low on the hedonism scale. This is good, right? This is basically checking the box for popedom. More to a marketer's interest, notice how high he scores on the openness scale. Notice conversely on almost the diagonally across from that on the bottom, low on emotional range. Emotional range actually sounds a little negative, but emotional range really means how responsive you are to your environment. People with that profile are very reactive to targeted marketing. They're more responsive to targeted marketing. So we just found someone who we know is going to be more responsive. Our bid value just went up. But if we want to talk about the messaging to this person, what's the kind of message that's going to resonate with this person? Not just the bid, but now we can talk about the message. Because you have someone who scores low on what's called anything really on this emotional range, but particularly something like self-consciousness, meaning you're not going to be responsive to messages that are based on peer pressure. So the silly version of this is the Pope's not going to respond to 9 out of 10 popes bought a pair of jeans. I think, first of all, he wears more robes, right? So I don't know if he wears jeans. But it just doesn't resonate with him. That's not who he is. Conversely, look at how high he scores under openness, under this artistic sensibility. Now, is that not a marketer's dream, to be able to talk about the images and the language that would resonate not with a 70-year-old man or a segment of 70-year-old men, but with this person named Francis? That's what cognitive marketing starts looking like. Another almost religious figure is Oprah, just to give you another point of view. She's interesting, different profile. She scores really high on this harmony scale. Harmony, and then there's another category on top of that called harmony. People who score high on harmony are networkers. They really value social engagement. They can be very powerful influencers because of the strength of their social networks. But you also notice towards the bottom how strong this trust score is. So again, from a marketing perspective, really powerful network. I'd like to be a part of this, but it's not someone who lets other people into their network. We're not going to hit her with one message and have her trust. We're going to earn that by building a relationship with this brand. And if we can do that, we unlock a lot of potential, not with a 50-year-old woman, not with a segment of TV celebrities, but with Oprah, the person. So it changes our bid and it changes our message. That's the person. In the cloud of data before, we talked about the person, and then I said context matters a lot, right? So let's talk about context. What if we could know not just where a person is, but how they're feeling? That would change our bid, that would change our marketing. I was at the Raleigh airport a couple weeks ago, and there was a guy standing next to me waiting for the shuttle bus for our car rental company. Our shuttle was not coming. All the other shuttles were coming by. He was clearly getting frustrated. He got out his phone, and he started to go like this. And then at the counter, his car wasn't ready, so he got his phone back out, and he was typing away. I don't know what he was typing, but I imagined this guy writing these really angry tweets or some blog post about how bad the dealership was. Now, his location was the car dealership. So traditional programmatic would say, I'm going to hit him with a message that says, welcome to sunny Raleigh. Hope you had a great stay. Tone deaf. Because we know more about this person than their location. We know how he's feeling. He's feeling frustrated. Now, if I'm a competitor and I know the location with the tone, if you remember the old Avis ads, we're number 2, we try harder. Next time, try us. That's a message that resonates to the person in the moment because that's knowable in real time. I actually want to go back and just say, here's the 24-year-old woman. She wrote a blog post. So this character that we're talking about, it's about, in this case, making brunch. And if you read even the words on the screen, you can see how emotional she is when she talks about it. She speaks about it in very emotional terms. In part, if you go further down, she talks about making brunch with her mother. And that's where a lot of this emotion comes from. Tone Analyzer is a different Watson capability that will able to be able to ingest that information, and it makes sense of it in real time in terms of the tone and the emotion. So for example, without a human having to intervene, we know that there's a lot of joy and happiness in this. We know that that's tinged by some sense of sadness. When we put those together, we think of it more as nostalgia or melancholy. Okay? Also look how confident she is in terms of her language. So there's a real emotional moment to connect with her on a brand basis if we're able to match that tone with something that's relevant to the way she's feeling today and the confidence that she feels when she talks about this. So you take these kinds of capabilities, you put it together with the machine learning that underpins everything we're talking about. If you want to know how Watson got good at Jeopardy, Watson played a lot of Jeopardy. How does Watson get good at oncology? Spends a lot of time with doctors and nurses, and they teach it oncology. How do you get good at bid optimization? You let Watson do a lot of bids on programmatic media using more of the data than we've ever used before. We started the Cognitive Bid project in late 2015, and it was very much based on the story that I'm telling you, that we spent a lot of money on programmatic media, and we were not getting the return we wanted. So the question was, could you apply some of these technologies to bid optimization? What would the return be? It started with IBM Research as a fairly academic project. We were not thinking about rolling this out at scale. We wanted to understand what the real applications of cognitive were in a problem that was very practical like this. We started with a very simple model. It did not have all the data initially that I'm showing you now. It was basically the basics of machine learning and a handful of variables about time dimensions and seasonality and creative formats and variables like that. We were really surprised when we ran out the model that in the first proof of concept, we were starting to see results that were, on average, 35% improvement over our base. To be clear, we ran it as an experiment, so everything was randomized and we split our audiences. And what was powerful about it, of course, is IBM is a big company. We have good agencies. The base was not a softball. It was sort of the state of the industry. So to see Cognitive Bid come out of the gates with a 35% improvement on base was startling and exciting. And the only problem when you have that kind of result is immediately the CEO and the CMO just want to scale it out. IBM's in 170 countries, so this is not the easiest thing because it was December to scale up by the end of the year. What happened is we said we will scale it out, and starting in 2016, first quarter, we start to scale it. We enhanced the model, but what we started to see as we went out into new countries like Japan is the results start to come down. So first quarter 2016, instead of having 35% lift, we were seeing about a 3%. 3% is okay. It's not bad, we'll take it, but it doesn't make your heart beat, right? It doesn't get you excited that you created something new. We had to make the model better, but the essence of the problem was not the model. Even the basic model was performing fine. The problem we realized is there's a difference between having a cognitive model and being a cognitive business. Cognitive businesses have to redesign processes with an emphasis on data collection. That was the learning. The way IBM puts money into market can be around an event, for instance. So IBM sponsored Wimbledon recently, the Masters golf. We put the money in market around Masters, we take it out. We have 3 weeks of data and it's back out. You can't run a cognitive business that way, it turns out. That may not surprise any of you, but you have to design your processes to emphasize the quality of the data collection. So we had to dramatically change the way we do financing and funding, the way we thought about duration of campaigns, in order to maximize this idea of cognitive business. What happened as we started to then make the improvements both to the model and to the cognitive business is we went from the 35% proof of concept, 3%, 11%, 17%, 22%. Right now, we are in the mid-20s very consistently. We've reached the point where we've just shut down the traditional way of doing it. This is the new way of doing it in IBM. And now the question is, this is the new baseline. But this is still pretty basic stuff in terms of what's possible. So that's the new baseline. What makes this so powerful, what makes this so exciting, is not that we've had these great results. It's fabulous that we have 25% improvement. That's good. That money matters. What makes it so exciting for a data science perspective is we're just getting started. There's so much more data we can bring into this. There's so much more power we can bring into this. The way we talk about it in my team is imagine you had a child. You gave birth to it, and you have an infant. And I don't know how you do this, but you taught your infant how to play chess. And your infant, from the moment you teach it to play chess, it beats you. Beats you all the time. Beats you by 25%, if you can win chess by 25%. What's going to happen when it's a teenager? What's going to happen when it grows up? If you're not taking this stuff seriously in the profession that we're all in, marketing or data science, if you're not understanding the potential implications of this for our profession and our industry and for our own careers, you're missing a really big story that's happening. And so I want to go back and just restate the basic premise, which I see as having 3 parts. Number one, specific to programmatic. The industry has a problem with this idea of programmatic. I think if you're not in marketing, that's okay, because this problem exists across the whole world. We don't understand our customers. We're not unlocking the data. We're really not unlocking the full value of the data to understand people, not segments, people. That's particularly hard because of the amount of data, so it's overwhelming our systems. Now, I believe, and IBM's perspective on this is we're entering a new era of business where it's not enough to be data-driven. You're going to have to make more sense of the data, and we believe you're going to have cognitive solutions as part of that suite of capabilities. But whether you believe that bigger story about a cognitive business era, this particular story about IBM and cognitive bid optimization is a really important lesson to say, at least in one place, in one company, we've discovered this tremendous return from even some fairly simple versions of this idea of cognitive bid. So I started with a game. I was going to finish with a trivia question. I tried this out with the advertisers. I'm going to see if you guys are better than the advertisers. Does anyone know the first talkie movie, the first movie that had dialogue to it, especially? There you go. We have someone from Netflix. It was a softball. Jazz Singer. So Jazz Singer, the first line. Does anyone know the first line for bonus points? The first line of the first movie. It was, "Wait, wait, you ain't heard nothing yet," which is just the perfect introduction when you talk about cognitive or artificial intelligence, how it applies to understanding customers. Just wait, wait, you ain't seen nothing yet. Thank you.